Okay, I will start. So today I'm going to talk about the NLP communication model and how we think and behave. So in this, the important thing that we need to understand is it's about this particular diagram that I have on the screen, right? It talks about a person who has any external event that is coming. So external event or something that is um, that a person experiences within himself. So he thinks about something, or something is happening outside of you. For example, this COVID situation that's happening, right? It's an external event. Now, when it comes to us, it will come to us through our five senses. So five senses would be our sight, sound. So like our eyes, ears, nose, throat. So basically, how visualizing or listening, or you feeling something about it. Um, you taste or you smell, right? So anything that comes inside our system, whatever we experience, it it happens by one of these uh, five sensory organs that we have, right? Now what happens is, whenever something comes within our system, right? Now you it goes through certain sets of filters that we have. Now these filters are our thinking, right? How our mind works. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail about this, but the essential idea here is that it goes through some of these sets of filters or components of the model, and it creates a representation of the event within our minds, and that's called the internal representation. Now when it sets up that internal representation, it creates emotions. So when it and that emotions is basically the state of mind, right? We can say our happy state, sad state, or excited state, or so those kinds of stuff. That's the state. And now when we have that state, right, it immediately reflects on our body. So for example, if we are stressed, right, we have an emotional stress. What happens? We sometimes we freeze, or our face shrinks, or our face goes red if we are in anger. So people, you can see that. Um, so all of that is basically how it comes into our physiology, right? The emotional state. Now when all of this happens, right, what happens is we tend to create some kind of behaviors. Now behaviors could be, if you're angry, you could actually become very quiet, or you can start shouting. If you're laughing, or if you're very happy, you are laughing, you might start laughing. So that laughing itself is a behavior, right? Or if you are fearful, if you feel danger, so you might react. Our body reacts differently, and our behaviors start showing up. So essentially, the idea here in this communication model is, when we're talking about neuro linguistic programming, anything that comes outside of us, right, we interpret that using some of our filters, which I'm going to just talk about in a moment. That creates a representation of that particular event within our mind, which creates emotions, and it changes our body physiology, which and these are all interchangeable. So our body physiology can actually change our state of mind, right, or the emotional state, and change the representation, or vice versa, and then eventually that creates our behaviors. So if I move on to the models, right, the components of the model, when I talked about delete, distort, and generalize here, it's basically saying that we see so much information outside, right? We feel all the sensory organs has so much information that is coming from all over around us. Now, we want to make sure that we only pay attention to the experiences that we are aware of, or we want to be aware of. So we actually delete everything else outside of that. So we basically selectively paying attention to our experiences, right? Now, a good example of this is, you might sometimes have heard people looking for their glasses, or people looking for something that they've lost, and it's actually right, either it's on the top of their head, or it's lying somewhere close by, but they just can't see it. Right now, what happens is your experience, right? Your mind knows that somewhere around, and you probably also think that I know it is somewhere around, but I don't know where it is, and it's probably lying under your under your nose, and you can't remember it. So it's actually deleting that reality. So that's what means by selectively paying attention to our experiences. Now, when I talk about distort is basically we shift our experiences by misrepresenting our reality. Now, an example of distortion would be in in the current state of COVID, for example. Now we hear lots of news coming around, right? Now, a lot of times when we are looking at numbers, right, there's probably another person who's died today in NSW. So now when we hear that news, or some person has the number of new cases has risen by 10%. If we, for example, if we hear that news, now everybody understands that number, what that number is, but everybody interprets that number based on their own understanding, right? So they're misrepresenting that reality. Somebody might really become very upset by the increase in numbers. Somebody might not be upset because it's just 5 people who've got sick. And even if there's one person who's got sick, somebody might be really unhappy about it. So we're actually distorting that reality. Now, there is another example. If you think about some very happy event that happened in your office or at your home, and you try and remember that particular event, and if there is another person who's with you in that same event, both of you have actually experienced that same event, but both of you have a different version of that event. So you might remember some parts of it, or you might actually distort the reality to make sense out of it. But other person might actually say that same event had a different version. So you have different versions of the same event. What's happening here is we are distorting what has happened by what we think has happened. So we're shifting our experiences by misrepresenting the reality. That's what distort means in this case. When I talk about generalize, it's basically we draw global conclusions based on 1, 2, or more experiences. So it will be there will be things like, okay, a very common example is I don't like to go shopping because I've had multiple bad experiences. I don't want to go shopping, or I don't want to go exercising, or I don't want to, in general, going out at night is bad, or in general, going out for a 2-kilometer drive is bad. Now, how have you created that conclusion? There are things that you may not know. So you're generalizing your experience of 1 or 2 cases, and you are actually creating a belief system within yourself. I will talk about beliefs as well when we come to that, but you're actually generalizing it and creating your own conclusions about what should happen and what shouldn't happen. Right? So when we go into our filters, this is the delete, distort, and generalize are the core ones. It starts with there. So any experience that we are having, we're deleting some portion of that experience, we're distorting some portion of that experience, and we're generalizing some portions of that experience. Then we actually come into this particular area where we say, okay, based on time of the event, or where it has happened, or the energy of that event. Energy would mean the aura, how we felt about it. So you actually create some conclusions based on what you've heard or what you've seen, based on some of the memories from your past experiences, based on some of your decisions. I'll talk about meta programs, values, beliefs, and attitudes. So all of this, any information that comes, you first delete, distort, or generalize that information of the experience, and then it goes through some of these filters. Now, what are these filters all about? Meta programs. Now, meta programs are basically a our thinking about our identities or personalities, right? So our personalities that we think that we have made over time, by either we have preserved it or broken down some of the generalizations. A very common example of meta programs is being an introvert or an extrovert. Right? Everybody's probably heard about what's an introvert or what's an extrovert, or who's an introvert, who's an extrovert. Now, how does that personality come into being? Right? So it is based on the meta programs we have in our own system that create that identity trees for us. We're generalizing, okay, in a group of people, I am the one of the most outspoken. So generally, everybody thinks who's outspoken is an extrovert. So I am an extrovert. So you start thinking about it and you start behaving that way. And we create some generalizations, right? Similarly, if there is an extrovert or if there's a judger who's always judging people, right? Uh, so this is basically, these are all things that are happening within our system, in our minds. So um, and the experiences that we have uh, from of the external event, after the delete, distort, and generalize, we go through these meta program filters, and what happens is we create our own representation of that experience. Now, what about values? Now, values are basically how we decide whether our actions are good or bad, right? Then there can be some ideas that we are willing to invest time, energy, and resources. Um, it's basically generalizations of our core of who we think we should be, right? Now, values are generalizations like I am respectful, I have integrity, I am achieving good things, I am very helpful in nature, those kinds of things. So they are all values. These are our things that help us understand our motivation. Now, when we are looking at when we are experiencing something from external, right? We kind of, it comes and we interpret things from our values system as well. And when we do that, we start creating some beliefs, right? Now, when beliefs, what do you mean by beliefs? Beliefs are basically convictions or acceptances. Um, they're I will say they're like uh, they're things that we have been convinced about or we have accepted to be true, right? For example, a very common thing that has started today is eating non-vegetarian food versus eating vegan food. Now, a lot of people who are vegetarian versus non-vegetarian, so belief system comes into the picture. People who eat one kind of food believe that that's the only way to do it, versus people who have another kind of food habits. They believe that's the only way to go for it. So you create beliefs, and beliefs are basically something that has been in your you've done a generalization of certain things that are going around you, maybe from childhood, right? But it starts you start focusing on that, and it becomes a belief within you. Now, basically, belief system becomes like a state of the world. So we all believe that we are uh, uh, the COVID-19 is going to go away, right? We all believe that we are all going to be alive till the age of 95, or we all believe that we are all very, very healthy. We all believe that we are not going to be affected by COVID-19. Now, these are all beliefs. Now, there may be truth behind them, there may not be truth behind them, but for us, we think they are true, and we create generalizations based on our experiences. That's how beliefs form, right? When I talk about attitudes, now, attitudes are basically how we actually are thinking about um, ourselves based on our values and belief systems, right? And attitudes are based on certain subjects. Now, I have an attitude towards, for example, if I'm doing this particular program, so my attitude toward this program is I'm going to be able to share my experiences, my beliefs. I'm going to be able to share my knowledge and be able to help people. Now, that's my attitude. Now, I have a positive attitude. I have so those kinds of attitudes are formed based on your own values and belief systems, right? And people will often tell you things like, well, that's just the way I feel about that. right? That's how I feel about exercising, or that's how I feel about friendship, or that's how I feel about uh, doing doing homework, or that's how I feel about education. So how I feel about learning. So these are all attitudes. So it actually represents how you are going about doing things day to day. When I talk about memories, basically memories. What are memories? So they are uh, the perceptions that we have of our experiences and things that we believe has happened with us, good or bad. It can be both good and bad, right? Now, good and bad is again, it's something every person has within their own thinking, right? Now, in general, it is in psychology, right? A lot of psychologists I've heard, they believe that whatever we are reacting today, right, to events, it's based on our past memories, right? Um, so whatever has happened in the past, we are basing that as the source of how we are doing things today, right? And our behavior plays a lot of things. So if you have a bad memory about uh, say going out to a pub, or going out to to ride a bike, then you probably are going to, that's going to impact your behavior, right? And how you're going to do things. So if you have a very good memory about going to beach, so next time you want to go to beach, you'll probably jump in, right? So that's the idea. Now, when I talk about decisions, now decisions are basically things that are created based on what has happened with us in the past, right? And these decisions can affect our entire life. So if I am thinking that uh, I can not get a particular job in the next 3 months, that's a decision you've created. Or if you're thinking that I am going to be healthy, I'm going to lose 10 pounds or 10 kgs in the next 15 days, that's a decision. Now, decisions basically are made either consciously by being aware of what's going on, or being unaware, right? We sometimes create decisions even if we are unaware. So why this discussion? So I went quickly through all of these. So the idea is that when we have some event that is coming into our coming into for external event, we're actually deleting that info, some of the information, we are distorting the information, and we are generalizing. And based on some of the filters we apply on the information that we've either deleted or distorted or generalized, we create some kind of an internal representation of the event, right? We create the internal representation. Based on that internal representation, what happens is that there is an emotional state that comes around that particular event because of the representation. When we have that emotional state, it impacts directly our body, right? And it creates behaviors. So sometimes you might have seen that you see some stressful event that has happened, something that you really didn't like. It went through your filters, and you're kind of not unhappy about it. You've created an unhappy internal representation, and that creates an emotional state. And you become fatigued, you become very tired, you become very non-energetic. What happens? Your body starts reacting that. When your body starts reacting that way, your behaviors are corresponding behaviors start showing up. You're not talking to people, or you're sad. You're away from people. Versus if there is something very good that has happened, and you're very happy about it, right? You have a happy state or a positive state, and you're excited. You're talking to people. Your body language shows. Your physiology shows, and your behaviors, corresponding behaviors show. You're excited. Your voice swells up. Your face swells up. You're bright. You brighten everybody around you. So this basically the whole idea behind neuro linguistic programming is that when you if you can change your filters, or right, we may or may not be able to. So there are ways that neuro linguistic programming helps you. to fix, I wouldn't say fix will be not the right word, but improve on what you delete, what you distort, what you generalize, and how you can use your filters to create better representational systems than where you were before. This idea of this filters creating different representational systems actually impacts your body, your mind, and how you act outside. That's the idea behind the communication model, right? Any questions on this diagram? So this is basically what I wanted to talk about today, is the communication model, what's happening outside of us, how we interpret the information today, how we create a representation of what's happening, how that impacts our mental state, and correspondingly creates behaviors, wanted or unwanted behaviors, because of our emotional state. So the responsibility for making the change happen lies on us, right? We can train ourselves to improve our filters so that we can get better representational system, internal representation, and thereby change our state and physiology and create behaviors that are more aligned with us internally, right? So that's why when I said how we think and behave, this is basically how we think, and this is how we behave. It's all related. Guys can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. Next week, what I'm going to talk about is neurolinguistic programming is based on a set of presuppositions or assumptions. They're kind of principles, right? 14. There are 14 principles, and based on those 14 principles, we actually are able to make the changes in ourselves and get what we want. So I wanted to talk about those 14 principles or presuppositions, assumptions, and share with you how those 14 things can actually change how you want to think about everything around you. Any questions you guys have for the model? I can keep the page on this model. If you have any questions, I can answer.
No, thank you, Chandar. Great presentation, some great insights coming out in terms of the communication model. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Any questions?
Not a question, Chandar, but great insights, and thanks for sharing with us. Paras here.
Thank you, Paras. Okay, if you have no questions, what I will do is I will, I'm recording this today's session, so I will post it here in this Skype group, and you can review it again. If you have any questions, please reach out to me directly, or you can put your questions on the chat and I can answer. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great Sunday ahead.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chanda. Great session.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Chanda.
Thank you.